as I mentioned, in 2017, Gartner said, projects PMI is out the door. I've let my certifications lapse. There'll be no market value in 2 to 3 years to the PMP. There continues to be more and more PMPs aggregate per year ever since then. Because it's still, but what we are is we're shifting, we're changing, right? All that, though, is also to say that the business relationship team and the QA team have not yet seen any benefit or don't see the value in running Scrum. Okay? As a PMO, you've given the charter to govern the delivery of IT services, but can only provide consulting services to the lines of business. In other words, it's more of an IT-sponsored PMO as opposed to a business-sponsored PMO. So that's a constraint that you have to work with. Probably not too unlike what Dusty has to deal with, I suppose. Okay? And not unusual, by the way. Dusty, I don't know if it helps, but you're not alone in this world. All right. Any questions on the background of the company, what the strategic goals are, the lines of business, or anything like that? Not yet? Okay. So let's take a look at this. So the projects. So this is the demand side of things. The first project is to take the customer service systems and consolidate them into one system. In other words, we want one enterprise system for customer interactions. Okay. There will be an RFP to outsource that work primarily, but the decision has already been made. Instead of doing a consolidation into one, we're going to do a replacement system. Right, a replacement in the customer service as opposed to aggregating everything to an existing system. Okay. The second project is QA said if we want to meet our strategic goal of streamlining our delivery, we need to automate testing. Okay, so the QA said we need an automated testing system where we essentially write our test scripts and the system just takes over and runs those tests against our applications as a result, however many applications we have. Okay? You all have an automated test system? We'll talk more about that.
Dan, that's where we're a little bit different. Last week I mentioned that we're a buy, not a build shop for the most part. So we don't have a QA team necessarily. We recruit internal resources from IT, PMO, and the business to perform as the QA team. So
check validate the deliverables from the buyer.
Yeah.
Or from the seller, I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we're getting to the point where we're getting better at defining what, the scope of testing is and writing scripts and, coming up with the strategy around it. We had some software quality assurance training a couple of years ago, and we're applying those best practices the best we can, but it's a hard thing when you're trying to teach, judges and clerks and attorneys and police officers and fill in the blank, hey, go build a test script and we need you to test. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So we have to invest more in training our project teams in the roles that we're asking them to fill. Yeah. That's an opportunity for improvement that Brandon and I have realized in our last two big projects that, if we're going to ask folks to do things, we've got to give them the tools and the training to do it. And do that in a more robust way. So that's one of the things we're working on. So we are our own QA team, if you will. Yeah. And there certainly aren't any test automation tools because we're not really building and iterating, and it's not like we're at we're building a product somewhere and we're not at NASCAR and we're just doing the same thing over again, but we're adding to the same thing that we're doing in a high volume where we need automation and all these things. So yeah. Automation would be nice probably in some areas, but that's like George Jetson stuff right now.
So just and maybe I slip a little more into the consulting side of things right now, but so on the seller side, I do think it's important. Well, first of all, let me back up. So one of the tenets or principles, as it were, that I would always advocate is the buyer always owns the quality, right? Because the buyer is the approver of quality. So if you approve it, you have to own it, right? That's not to say you have to do all the testing. It just has to say that you have to understand if the testing is effective and it's complete, and you can validate that the testing has met the objectives. So, with a seller, what that means to me is we need to understand from the seller, even in the contract, what their QA is going to be. And if a seller, Scott may kick me in the shin or may actually agree with me on this, if the seller says that they deliver by Scrum or they're agile and they do not have automated testing, I would lower them on the consideration list, because that testing will end up being, if it's done manually, will end up being a blocker to deliver everything within the Scrum, because the testing burden is so high. As a matter of fact, in PMI's PMI ACP guide, Agile Practice Guide, they say, and I couldn't agree more, automated testing is a prerequisite for Agile. And Scott, would you agree with that? Or
Yeah, and isn't that kind of defined in the SLA?
yeah, I think the SLA will describe the criteria,
Okay.
but I think it is if you own the quality, I think it's also important for them to describe how they're going to meet
The
SLA.
modality for, yeah.
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 Too often
Those are
I've
questions
seen.
that we need to ask, because if they don't have it, they're not going to put that in there.
Well,
And I know that in
I
this
don't-
project we've seen that where it's, things are not getting tested because they don't have the automated test system, but they need to get it out there, and so then our folks end up doing the
But here's the difference that
Testing.
I think we need to be, I guess, discuss, and maybe there's a difference, maybe there not, but oftentimes, most of the time, hopefully, a vendor isn't developing product for us. They're bringing their well-developed product to us and configuring it to meet our business needs.
right.
So does test automation still have a role to play in delivering configuration versus delivering a product? Because I remember being in test teams and in development organizations where we would use load runner, and we would load up the system for performance testing, and we would stress the system out, and we would test the whole product. We would basically regression test the product as we added a feature to the product, but that was the product, right?
Yeah.
That was the base code. It wasn't, hey, City of Spokane, tell me what you want the screen to look like, and I'm gonna move the fields and the text around. I mean, so in my mind, those are two different things.
Yeah. So from my perspective, Dusty, the answer is unequivocally yes for configuration, and here's why. Most systems that are marketable have so many different configuration options that can influence the outcome of the process and the outcome of the function, because they're meeting multiple customer demands. And so you can definitely screw up a lot of system processes through configuration because there's so many options. So, but that's why I typically, if we were doing a straight buy, I would never do a waterfall. I would do an iterative project. I would say we're going to set up a prototype, we're going to set up a pilot or a number of pilots, and at each time we go through this, we're going to add the interfaces as need be. And that's another reason why automated testing is so important, because as soon as you interface with something else, that interface is typically code, not configuration of some sort. It's rules and it's object oriented. I understand that it's not ones and zeros and things like that, but that's where you get really screwed up with buy systems, is in the interfaces, because both systems have to understand each other. So anyway, that's my 2 cents, as it were.
So, Dan, just a quick question. You bring up an interesting point when it comes to like integrations, and I think about the world of APIs. What's your strategy to manage that gray area where it's like it's not a Microsoft issue, it's a Salesforce issue?
Yeah, so the source of the data. You have to be clear about it. That's all it gets into data management, and data management team. I think you need to have clear ownership of data at the transactional level, the configuration level, the foundation level, and so on and so forth. Have clear ownership, and I would always put ownership of the functional and the transactional with the business from a data governance standpoint and things, but they should describe what is the source, and whatever you need to do is done in the source, so it has less impact to the dependent systems. But then now we're getting into architecture.
Right.
I mean, I'm dealing with a project right now where we're trying to transfer or transform 40 million records. Right. That's the bulk of it. So yeah, I mean, there's really smart people in this area. They just really are in the weeds all the time and have a hard time thinking architecturally. But anyway, that's a whole different story. So if we may, can we get back to the projects then? So the next project is a customer service team reorganization. So what they're wanting to do here, and this is one of those projects that, Laz will hear about 3 months after they kick it off, right? Which is in order to align to, quicker and more efficient customer interactions, that strategic goal, the heads of the home-based security and the private security lines of service have determined that they want to break the customer service team and align them with the lines of service. Okay, so not one customer service team, but two, as it were. So that being a project. The infrastructure migration, this is part of a long-term program where everything is getting migrated into a hosted environment. This is the last year of the program. They need $13.5 million of your $15 million available in order to finish all the work. Okay, not that ever happens. It's like mobile app for private security scheduling. This is something that is something we need to rank in terms of priority and understand where it fits as such. Okay, so before we get into prioritization, what I would like for you to do is I would like for you to instead of picking all, or writing up OKRs for all 5 projects, just pick one of the projects, as it were, and I'm going to ask you to declare which project you're picking so that I can make sure all 5 are covered, and so we can discuss later. But then write up 3 objective key result, OKRs, outcomes that you want to achieve with a measurement of some sort from that project. Okay? So pick one that's closest to you, or that you would know the most about, or maybe one that you're dealing with right now, as it were. So anyone want to go in terms of which project they're going to choose?
I'll take 2, Dan.
Okay, Dusty is 2.
I'll do 3.
Ken is doing 3. Okay. Who's next?
I'll do 5.
Brandon 5. Laz, do we have you, or are you there? Oh, there you
go. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Which project do you want to take?
The one that people don't want to take.
Okay. So we'll see which one's missing at the end, but are you going to sign Chris's for him? Or Chris, which one do you want? Chris, I'm not sure. You're off mute, but I can't hear you if you're trying to speak, or you're just thinking. Okay, well, you can type it in the chat if need be. Peggy, what's your favorite project here?
I think there's only two left, aren't there? Is it 1 and 4?
Yeah, you can do whatever one you want, though. You can do the same one somebody else does. It'd be interesting to kind of compare too. So it's up to you.
I guess I'll do that. I'll do work with Dusty on the dusting. That's dear to my heart too.
Number 2. Okay. Scott, what are you thinking?
I think that I should piggyback with Ken and do project 3.
3? Okay. And Teresa?
I'll just piggyback on somebody else. I don't know that I'd really be able to do one, but
Okay, how about working with Brandon on number 5?
okay. Thank you.
No one chose number 4. I wonder why.
Well, that should go to Laz.
So Laz, you got number 4?
Yes, sir. I do.
All right. So go ahead and we'll leave the line open here and stuff. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, but let's take 10 minutes. I'll put the timer up here. Let's take 10 minutes and write up 3 OKRs for those projects. Those of you that are working on the same projects, if you want to use the call to do that, feel free to do so, to compare notes or whatever. So 10 minutes. You guys ready? Here we go.
Sure.
So basically, what you're asking here on number 4 is that I find what key performance indicators I'm going to use to measure the success of this project and the progress.
Based on the objectives that you're trying to achieve.
Based on the objective, which are the only thing I have to go, is the description that we have on that paragraph, correct?
Yep.
Now,
Which is about as much description as you get from the business, right?
right, exactly. So then I can actually create my own set of objectives
Yes.
and assume this is a real thing that is happening. The last paragraph said there, the infrastructure team has 13.5 million for the fiscal year for the most. This is primarily being done with an outsourced provider, but it also says that they're planning to let a lot of people go. They provide severance, and so the money on the 13 million is not going to be part of the severance package to the people, right? This is just for the migration of the infrastructure.
Yeah, because the severance would be from SG&A. You know what I mean by SG&A? Private companies is basically your operations budget, your payroll. You
said SG&A.
Yeah, SG&A is something services, general and administration. I think it's a term used in accounting and finance and accounting for
selling general administrative expenses.
Yeah, selling.
Okay.
Selling.
Yeah. Okay. So that is that is coming out of the operations and expenditures sheet of the balance sheet of the organization. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. Now, put that in your back pocket though, because eventually we're going to get to resource management.
And are you then saying that perhaps some of these people could be assigned to other departments in the organization instead of just letting them go?
Yeah, we'll figure that out, because if you go through the 5 scenarios, the 5 projects,
Uh-huh.
the total of the 5 projects is greater than your budget, which is also not unusual.
Yes. Okay.
But right now, all we're doing is OKRs.
Okay. I understand.
Good questions. Thank you. be wrapping up shortly. All right. As I took my list down here, I'm not sure that we got a number one, which is fine. Let's see. Project number one was the customer service system consolidation, so we could we don't have to necessarily work with that one directly. But okay, so number two, Dusty and Peggy. Did you all have a chance to communicate on it? Maybe there was some chatting or IM going back and forth, or you want to present together, or do you want to present separately what you thought of? Well, it looks like Dusty's on hold. Oh, probably because they're meeting together. I would imagine they probably called each other. That'd be my guess. All right. Well, they're on hold, so let's go on then to Ken, number three. You mind sharing what you came up with and Scott? I'm sorry, Scott as well. Do you mind sharing what you came up with your OKRs?
Sure. We didn't collaborate. We should have. I was waiting for Scott to tap into me and start talking to me using a component of Teams where we could meet privately. But plus, I also got pulled away momentarily. But what I relate this to, Dan, was a couple of the metrics that I deal with customer service that are kind of reflective in good or bad customer service, customer responses. So in this case, where customers are dissatisfied with the time that it takes, if they're experiencing frustration, that the customer service agents are as well. So a couple of metrics I use for maintaining that is the average speed to answer a call. So our objective would be to decrease average speed to answer. We want to streamline support. We want to go directly to the specialist for their section. So that's why we have the two separate customer service entities. Also, to be able to manage agent utilization, that's on the customer agent side, the frustration they might be experiencing. If we can manage their workload, we can reduce the burnout rate, whatever. So by allowing them to specialize and by giving them specific training, I think we can meet those needs.
So the objective being quicker response time, and the key result that would measure that is the number of touches of each call.
The average speed to answer.
Average speed to answer. Okay.
Yeah. And the second point was it's called the agent utilization. The objective is to maintain agent burnout, so they're not getting frustrated or having higher turnover of customer service agents. By being able to specialize and being able to provide them higher levels of training, we can manage their workload better.
Okay. Scott, what did you come up with?
Yeah, so my OKR one I put reduce the amount of time spent supporting a help request by 20% for each customer care team.
Okay. So that's an aggregate by team.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For OKR 2, I put increase customer satisfaction by 30% over a 9-month period, measured by post-phone call surveys and email surveys.
Okay.
Side note, the problem is not all customers want to provide feedback if stuff is working, right?
Surveys are prickly, right?
Right.
I had at one time in one of my certification classes, I had a Harvard business professor, like literally. I'm like, what are you doing here? And he was, what's that? A net. the thing, would you refer us in the future? What's that called? The net. Anyway, it's the people. It's the comparison of the people who would refer you versus the people who would not refer you, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, I get the point, but the problem is the people who are satisfied never speak up.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be really, really motivated to be a satisfied customer and provide a response, right?
And I don't think we have in our budget to offer Starbucks gift cards. Right.
We actually have done that in the past. It's funny that you say that, but we did customer service surveys, and for people that responded, we did a random drawing every month, and Eric Finch actually paid for 2 Starbucks gift cards.
Yeah, very good. Okay.
Okay, and then my OKR 3 was provide application-specific training to each customer care team with certification and required 80% passing rates, and assign a lead for escalation to increase satisfaction.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Okay, so there you have project number 3. So Dusty and Peggy, I think you guys were probably collaborating in a different team.
Yeah.
You want to do next?
I gave Peggy a call. For project number 2, that's all about the test automation piece and implementing that. So the first OKR would be reduce project QA phase timelines by 40% or 20 days. We tried to think through why we wanted to do automation in the first place. One would be to make things go faster, right? So that was our first one. And then the second one was reduce post-go-live errors by 40% or 30 errors in the first week. This goes back to the fact that if you have tools to throw at testing, you can cover more ground deeper than if you have people going out there and testing. So you could do 8 hours of testing in 30 minutes, basically. Then the third one is increase QA capacity for other tasks and projects by 30% or 12 hours per week per tester. So again, efficiency gains, right? Those testers can go do something else on other projects. And so those were our 3.
Okay. Very good. Excellent. All right. Laz, you had the big one, right? The elephant in the room.
Laz is the elephant in the room.
Yeah. It's always big. Like the mammoth. Like, in
Laz, are you like me where every time I turn, my tusks knock everything down?
Yes.
Like, I freaking hit the corners with my shoulders, brother. Literally. Sometimes. And I turn too sharp, and I hit the corner with my shoulder.
Very good.
And I look at the corner and say, the next time, it's not going to be easy for you, corner. Okay. So mine was a migration of a set of assets. It could be switches, firewalls, older gear, storage, all that stuff, migrating to a cloud service, a cloud provider. The first thing that I did was I went ahead and read carefully the value chain that the organization has on the corporate security audits, on the private security and demand, and the home-based security. So my first OKR was maintain or improve platform uptime during the current fiscal year. So as these migrations are moving, one of the things that I'm going to be watching is platform uptime, because I'm fairly certain that all these moves of infrastructure are going to have some level of impact, whether positive or negative, into the uptime and availability of the different systems that the organization uses to deliver value to the customers.
Yeah.
That was my first one.
Okay.
The second OKR was, so now that I am making sure that the value delivered to the customers is not impacted, or at least I'm monitoring that. The second one that I'm going to monitor is the installation rate, also known in the software development world like the burn rate, which is if we have to migrate 500 devices in a year, how many are we migrating, and how is that curve showing that there are less and less migrations remaining, and compare that with the cost of migration increase. So I will have a graph that has the burn rate and the cost. And that will allow me to do is, it will allow me to assess the speed of delivery of the scope of work compared to the cost of delivery of that scope of work using the baseline, because there was a company that was outsourced to do this job. They said they needed 13 million. I'm assuming that in that contract, I have the details of the cost per equipment, at least to a certain level. So I'm going to be able to do that. Those are the two OKRs that I've come up with at the moment you said, come back.
Okay, very good. So I sense a burn down chart in your future. So what you bring up is really interesting point, because you always thought through how you would visualize the progress relative to that objective. And so that's always very important, because you can set an objective with metrics, but if you can't collect, we'll talk more about this in metrics and governance and things like that on Friday. But if you can't collect the metric, you can't report against it, right? So you have to have, sometimes the metric would be good, but the amount of time it would take to collect it, to report it, it doesn't, would kind of offset its value. But what you bring up here is an interesting point that I think is worth mentioning. The same tools that are used by a Scrum team, the Kanban board, the cumulative flow diagram, the burn up chart, burn down chart, and things like that, they can just as easily be applied at the program level, because we're simply following the same visualization. Now, the nature of the work items in those charts are going to be very different, because we're taking our MBIs or MVPs or whatever, but it is a way to track program progress. And we'll talk a lot more about that in scheduling and, of course, in governance as well. So, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so by the way, an actual application of all what we're learning today. Yesterday, Dan Wardell was asked to put a prioritized list of all the initiatives his office is working on. And he attempted 2 times to get that list completed, but it was missing information. And the information that was missing was the priority or the sequence. So I actually refer back Dan Wardell to the concepts that we learned here. And the other piece of information that was missing was, what is the conveyor belt, the process that you're going to use to deliver these value items? Right. And then we discussed, it's going to be a project, it's going to be a service request, it's going to be agile, no, it's going to be waterfall. And we actually produced a list to leadership that includes that level of detail.
Oh.
And so, yeah, we are now beginning to be able to, because we can talk the same language, using these tools and techniques to address a request from leadership that I wanted you to know that.
Yeah, that's very good. So I guess you can go ahead and sign off from the training, because you got it.
We are here to learn. We're learning.
No, I'm not saying that facetiously, because that's really, I mean, in practical application, that's really where we're going. And again, it's, we buy into these big frameworks and things like that, but there are some really key practical things that can be applied, as we kind of build the bicycle as we ride it, right? So that's excellent. That's really good news. It really it warms my heart, actually, that's been going on. So, all right, that was going on. So number 5, Brandon and Teresa.
All right, I believe Teresa had to step away, so I will take this one. So our first objective is to provide access to customers to request security services via a mobile app. And I'd say a measure for that would be customer adoption, reducing calls to office staff for job requests by 50% after the first quarter of implementation.
Ooh, that's aggressive.
Oh yeah, everybody loves their mobile apps now, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I love my phone a bit too much, actually.
I have way too many on my phone now. And another measure or objective would be presenting the mobile job, the availability of the jobs to employees from a mobile platform. And again, going with aggressive, employee adoption would be the measure. 100% of jobs that are available that have been viewed on a mobile app or have been accessed through the mobile app. We're going to really push this one hard so we can make savings everywhere in other places. And if there's a way to compare to the previous viewing method, however they would get their job information previously, we'd have a decrease in the job views using the previous method if that's they have to come into the office to view paperwork or whatnot.
Okay.
And for number 3, the mobile confirmation of job acceptance from employees. And so I'd say that the speed of acceptance would be the measure that we would be looking for here, the percentage of jobs fully staffed via the mobile app, and a decrease in office staff effort to fully staffed jobs, having to call folks that may meet the job qualifications to get them to commit to taking the job. And I didn't really have a percentage on that. I have no idea what that.
Well, these things will require some imagination, right? As they go.
Let's go with 100% again. How about
that? And I wanted to make a comment there because I think Brandon brings a good point. He's obviously doing this with a lot of imagination and a little bit of humor too, but oftentimes when we are asked to complete certain activities, the people asking for the progress, the speed of delivery, they are very optimistic.
Yes.
And sometimes I think super optimistic. And I think we need to have invested time to get them to understand that these requirement that you're putting on me, completing a utility information migration in less than a year for less than $1 million, it's not going to work. And we're going to advertise this as the success criteria. You're already setting us to fail. And we as leaders across the entire department, we need to be vigilant. When we see stuff like this, just say, hey, should we reconsider this? I'm thinking more like 3 years and $5 million on the UIS implementation, right? That's a good point.
That's closer.
Right, exactly, right.
If I can give you an example from the real world, I guess you would say, even though that 40 million records that I was talking about, that's a lot of records. I'm just saying. I mean, it's a lot of data. So what was the good news was that the seller, right, for that system, a hosted solution, that said, that's great because we just rolled out an API that smooths out the import of data from multiple sources. All you have to do is do the mapping in the API. Scott, you're familiar with this, right? Oh, just do the mapping. You'll be fine, right? We did a representative data set just because we had it as a risk on our risk register for the project. So we did a representative data set of 30,000 records. It took 16 hours to import them. We have 40 million records. Okay, so not only was it a risk that that came true, but it also was much worse than we had thought. So all that being said, we have basically an 8-week set of work that we've had to go through to solve this problem. That was definitely not anticipated. We had, we tried to go live at the end of October. And of course, now it's pushed out to mid-November because we did have some slack in the schedule. But that was a high-performing project team. By all accounts, they don't take much to manage. They're very smart people. They know what they're doing. They just look for priorities and clarifications, and they're ready to go. And they do their work on time and so on and so forth. Totally outside of their control. What's that?
Did he actually test it, your API performance, before claiming that it could do the work?
Well, so the whole emphasis on we just rolled out an API.
Exactly.
Right?
Here is the thing. We just rolled out, but if I rolled out an API, which I've done many times in my life, by the time I roll it out, I already tested the performance.
Well,
and I know how many transactions per second we can process.
Yeah. So if you think about it, and not to get too much into detail on it, but and Dusty can appreciate this, right? This goes all the way back to contract discussions. Because in the contract, we're talking about how we're going to get 40 million records in. Well, we're planning to build this API and roll it out as part of our product offering. Okay, so this is where I'm actually taking the lessons learned and saying, hey, Dusty, also it's worth asking the question, not just what the SLA is, but how we are going to meet the SLA, because that's the question that was not asked in the contract. Right?
Dan, is this ETL?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, it's extract from I guess you would call it that. It's kind of a long story, but yeah, I mean, 40 million records are something that you batch up, so it's not really a straight ETL system to system. But anyway, but there is a transformation and loading that has to occur. All right. Well, anyway, let's move on then, because what I'd like to do before we go on our next break is to talk about the next step, which is going to be prioritization. Okay. So in the next step for prioritization, what we plan to do is take those OKRs, and from there we're going to build out the MBIs, MVPs that we want to try to deliver in order to meet those objectives. Okay, this is the work that we're going to hand off to a team and follow a pattern for delivery. Okay. Excuse me. So this is the real tricky step. This is where the team of teams comes into play. Okay, where we're going to have to understand how we're going to prioritize, stick to the prioritization schema, but then also follow through on making sure we understand what we're going to deliver, so that we can then schedule it to figure out when it's going to be delivered. All right. So the Kano model. Has anybody heard of the Kano, K-A-N-O model of prioritization? So there are, if you were to look up Kano model on wikipedia.org, you would see that it's gone through many different iterations. But essentially, the way I'd like to explain it is you describe the objectives, or the MBIs and MVPs in terms of delighters, those that would delight our customer, or a basic. It's just something that's required in order to provide the solution. So you're categorizing these, or these sorts of priorities, right? The performance, those things that enhance the position or product offering. The dissatisfiers. If it were not present, our customer would be dissatisfied. Okay? So typically that model looks like something like this, where you have a customer satisfaction, customer dissatisfaction. There you have your delighters, your basics, and your performance. Obviously, you're going to fully implement the basics, even though it has nothing to do necessarily with customer satisfaction. The delighters you want to accelerate for customer satisfaction purposes, and performance, those things you want to continue to deliver straight up through that fully implemented to the point where the customer is satisfied portion of the quadrant. Okay? Does that make sense? So it's just a means of establishing priorities as a result. The Moscow method. Anybody heard of Moscow? Of course, because you live, close to Moscow. I've actually not been.
Does I like to go cow tipping really
How you'd like to go what?
cow tipping.
I saw Quiet Riot in concert at Cadillac Jack's in Moscow, Idaho in 1998. Just drink that in. Quiet Riot.
I don't want to tell you what my first concert was.
Well, that wasn't my first one. That was just one of my highlights.
Yeah, so Cadillac Jack sounds like a decent, my kind of place, but just from the name of it.
It was a great place.
Can I confess something? I wasn't going to say this, but it may be, I may get cut off right after this, but my horse's name is Dusty. I have a quarter horse named Dusty. So sorry, Dusty, but
that's okay.
The reason why she's a paint, a brown, like a bay paint. And so anyway, Dusty. But
I worked for the CIO at AT&T Wireless for a number of years, and 2 years I worked with him, and he called me Rusty every single day. So it happens.
And every time you went out with him, he ordered you a Rusty nail, right?
I went to his wedding for crying out loud, and he still called me Rusty. I mean, I was Rusty.
We'll let Ken share that comment. I won't share it. So should have. So must have, should have. Those that will enhance the desired benefit. Could have. Those that may be done if there is enough resources and time to accomplish. Typically for user experience enhancements, those sorts of things, and then won't have. Now I've also heard that expressed as would like to have, because nobody wants to say you won't have it, right? But those that don't impact the benefit, that we don't have the skills for. Remember we talked about practice things, or there are other dependencies that need to be resolved. Okay. Any questions on the Moscow methods? So take those MBIs, MVPs, or whatever, and you ascribe to them, it's an MSCW. And of course, keep in mind that you're obviously on the top of your ranked priority list. You're going to have mostly must-haves, right? But you may also have some should-haves. Because when you prioritize, that's also going to describe the order in which you're going to work the items. Remember, small batch versus big batch? We're not going to move multiple priorities through the program at the same time. We may move multiple priorities, the single priority for multiple teams across that Kanban board, right? So we have a number one priority that this team, number one priority that team, number one priority that team is working on, and those would go across the board. But that team has to finish that number one priority before they pick up the next one. Okay? Now you're like, how does this even work with traditional? It does. It's just the scale of what that looks like is probably bigger, right? With traditional, because there are more dependencies. We're going to get a lot more into that later. The next one is the cost of delay. So, sorry, I had some animation in there that I need to. You ask yourself 3 questions. What would this deliverable be worth if we had it right now? How much would it be worth if it were delivered earlier? So in other words, if it's worth $30,000 a month to us, if we have it in place 3 months earlier than we currently have planned, we'll earn ourselves $90,000, right? If it's something that's delivered later, 3 months after, we'll lose $90,000. That's what I mean by the cost of delay. So the higher the cost of delay, the higher the priority, in other words. So first of all, you have to assign a cost to the deliverable, describe it by period.
But is that the rule? So we're saying here that if I find a particular job or activity that has the higher cost of delay, I should put it on the priority on the top?
Yes. Barring,
but couldn't you say that if I have an activity that has the maximum amount of tangible value, if I deliver it earlier, shouldn't that be a possible criteria to put something on priority one?
Yeah, because if you have a deliverable with the maximum value, that will naturally be the highest priority in the cost of delay model. What this does not take into account is dependencies.
Okay.
What this doesn't take into account is dependencies, but we're going to work in dependencies later anyway. Okay, so sometimes you're blocked from getting the highest value because you have a dependency that has to be fulfilled.
Agree.
Scott, you look like you're deep in thought there. I'm picking on you a little bit.
Yeah, I should have turned off my camera. Right. I think about the dust under the rug. And what I mean by that is like there's certain things that are infrastructure upgrades, but I've heard that there's capacity issues. So my kind of question on my face is, how do you approach those when you know that there's things that need to be upgraded, but we don't have the capacity to do that?
Yeah.
And how does that rank in priorities?
So this is something that you may not want to apply across everything within the program.
Okay.
You may want to, so within a project, keep in mind you're going to have multiple MVPs, MBIs that you're creating. And so you apply them maybe just within the project. But for example, that infrastructure project, number 4, that Laz took, this probably isn't the right prioritization method. To your point, it's like, you just got to get it all done.
Right.
And so you have to ask yourself, do we even take that big infrastructure project and break it down into MVPs and MBIs? Well, that is a great question. But we'll talk about what that means from an overall program Kanban perspective, because I'll give you a little read ahead. What it means is you have this big hairball at one point in the roadmap, right? As soon as you insert and this is where the agile purists will say, "Wow, everything can be broken down and run by Scrum." Like the infrastructure kind of just has too many dependencies. But when you break apart the dependencies, when does a mousetrap no longer be a mousetrap, right? You got to deliver the mousetrap. So buy a feature. In buy a feature, this may. I was thinking about you, Dusty, when I was putting this together. So buy a feature. Think of yourself as a PMO director or program manager who is working with people who don't like to make decisions and want everything. Okay, not that ever happens.
That doesn't sound familiar.
It does sound familiar.
Can you even imagine that?
I'm gonna have to really focus on this.
Yeah.
So step 1 is each deliverable, MVP and MBI, you make sure you understand the total labor and materials cost of that deliverable. And again, keeping in mind that we're at high level planning. We're at program level planning, okay? So we're oftentimes just assigning a block of money to it, like we did in the scenarios, right? Then you gather the value stream steering and tell them how much money they have to spend. And what you want to do is tie that to the approved budget, right? And then, like with our program, where you see these 5 projects, if you total up the dollar amount in each of those projects, it's greater than the 15 million, right? And so what you would do then is go in and say, you have 15 million to spend. Here is the cost of each of these deliverables. Spend your 15 million and tell me when you're done. Okay? And there will be a couple that'll be left out. And then it'll become a little bit more clear where people's priorities are. So you can have those discussions. But it's a way of kind of taking the facilitate a shopping trip, if you will, where they shop for MBIs that you prepared, and then organize them against the total spend that the members are willing to spend on them. Okay, or average spend, if you will. Okay, so they can take their 15 million, they can break it up however they want to. Say, I want 5 million in the infrastructure project. I want to spread my 10 million everywhere else. So it's a way of helping them express where their priorities lie. Okay. What I generally find is that even though I have not used this with a steering team, I would like to, if given the opportunity, a value stream steering team, because I came across this more recently. I would like to give it a try, as long as they're willing to play along with it. But I generally find that in most organizations, once you lay out everything and you do that in context of the organization's strategic objectives, there ends up being more horse trading than argument, right? And so this is a way of doing that horse trading, so to speak. Although our farrier does in fact train mules if that's required. Another personal favorite of mine is the action priority matrix, and as we get into scheduling tomorrow, I think this will become a little bit more clear in terms of why this is good. So wait. I messed something up here. Sorry, give me just a second. I have an extra slide in. I'm sorry. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. So it's a way of qualifying your work items in terms of quick wins. So the impact is high, but the effort is low. Where impact is high and effort is high, you have major projects. Where impact is low and effort is low, those are things you can pop in as the opportunity presents itself. And infrastructure, a lot of effort, low impact. That's your thankless task, right? So that's your dust under the carpet, under the rug, so to speak. Okay. So this doesn't necessarily help you as much with priority, other than the fact that the higher the impact, the higher the priority, right? But it does help you understand start getting into the question of complexity, which is what we're going to deal with next. Okay? Because what we're going to do next is we're going to take those OKRs that we developed, and we're going to then create the MVP, MBI deliverables, then align those to the delivery patterns, whether it be traditional, iterative, incremental, agile, lean, whatever the case may be, understanding your capabilities, and we're going to go this next step of alignment after we come back from break. Okay? Schedule and resource management we'll address tomorrow along with risk. And then on Friday, of course, we'll get into governance. And we'll probably start governance a little bit tomorrow as well. Okay? What questions do you guys have so far? Is this making sense to you? I mean, do you feel like you can follow this flow?
Yes.
So, Laz, it does sound like you've implemented portions of this already. You've got kind of the core of it.
I am trying to. I am doing my very best.
And I think, yes, I can go with this flow, but there's elements of this that in going through it raise a lot of questions. Like, we went through the cost of delay pretty quickly. Cost of delay seems like a huge thing when you're talking about value. You're trying to quantify economic value. And Scott raised the question about capacity. And it's not necessarily a stagnant figure. When you present that, you could adjust that economic value or return. But maybe one of the questions would be, do you increase capacity to meet a different goal?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of variables involved in that, and I think it's one of the most important components of this. I mean, because I picture presenting this to management and talking about economic value, cost of delay might be the biggest single component of that.
Yeah, I think that you're bringing up a really good point because I'm giving you theoretical models, right? And so in practice, if we're going to be pragmatic with it, can you use a combination of those? Yeah, absolutely, right? You use a combination of those. You made a really good point about resource management. What we're doing at this point is we're assuming that we have infinite resources. I actually had a seller tell me that one time as a project manager. And so we need to plan out when you're capable of delivering things, because we want to be able to understand at what rate that we can send work over. And the seller said, you can assume infinite resources. We will bring resources to the problems to bear just as fast as you can get them. I'm like, okay. I gave him the entire project. Handle it. Like, don't tell me infinite resources, because that's a bunch of BS. You know?
Yeah, it's total BS, because quite often people will say that until you start putting dollars to it and assigning resources. And it's kind of like we always use the expression, we could grow corn on the moon. If you want to make investment, we'll make sure that happens.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. So anyway, but we'll get into that with resource management, because the other thing I would want to say about this, I'll introduce this, and we'll go on break. It's time for our break, and then I want to come back to this. But the value stream steering is a regular occurrence. So priorities is a consistent subject that we're iterating through whatever period we happen to be managing in. And they're going to shift on that, but it has to be an intentional shift on priorities. By intentional, it means the Titanic doesn't turn very quickly at full speed. All you have to do is look at the gash on the side of the Titanic to understand that, right? By the way, some historians believe that if the Titanic had not attempted to turn, it would have continued to float. It would have killed a lot of people, but it wouldn't have sunk, because the gash compromised too many compartments because they attempted to turn. Anyway, all that being said, that and $1.69 gets you a cup of coffee down at Denny's. So with that, let's go ahead and take our break here. We'll take 15 minutes, and we'll come back to this flow and talk about aligning to the patterns. Okay?